Welcome to our deep dive, into the world of Alan Greenspan
Oh, yeah.
and his Age of Turbulence.
Okay.
You've given us a collection of excerpts from his memoir.
Okay.
And it's not just about, dry economic theory.
Yeah.
It's about history,
Hmm.
personal stories, and the forces that shape our economic lives.
Yeah.
So get ready for some serious insights from a man who spent decades at the very heart of economic policymaking.
What I find really fascinating is how these excerpts offer kind of a first-hand look
Yeah,
at how major economic shifts played out over the last century.
right.
From the rise and fall of central planning to the, complexities of globalization.
Yeah.
We'll see how theory translates into real-world impact,
Yeah.
sometimes with surprising consequences.
We're going to explore Greenspan's views on everything.
Okay.
From forecasting to deregulation,
Right.
the role of the Fed,
Yeah.
even the impact of globalization.
Yeah.
But it's not all serious business. We'll also uncover those little details that bring history to life.
Okay.
Think Greenspan's early days as a jazz musician, or his encounters with people like Ayn Rand and Nixon.
Yeah.
Let's jump in and trace his path from jazz enthusiast to economic heavyweight, shall we?
His early love for jazz kind of offers a glimpse into the kind of thinker he would become.
Yeah.
As a musician, he was drawn to the structure of music theory, but also the creative improvisation
Right.
within that framework.
Yeah.
That balance between discipline and adaptability becomes a hallmark of his economic thinking.
And his connection to Ayn Rand,
Oh, yeah.
the philosopher and novelist known for her strong views on individual liberty and limited government.
Yeah.
It seems like that must have been a pretty significant influence.
His time with Rand definitely shaped his early thinking,
Yeah.
though he later recognized the limits of her rigid ideology,
Right.
especially when applied to real-world economic policy.
Right.
He was drawn to her emphasis on reason and individual achievement,
Right.
but he also learned to think for himself
Yeah.
and adapt his views
Yeah.
as he gained more experience.
So how did he go from these intellectual pursuits to the practical world of economics?
Right.
It's not the most obvious career path.
His analytical skills,
Yeah.
honed through music and philosophy,
Uh-huh.
actually turned out to be incredibly valuable.
Okay.
At Townsend Greenspan,
Mm-hmm.
the consulting firm he co-founded,
Right.
he focused on analyzing industries like steel
Okay.
and even the decline of the telegraph industry.
Why steel?
Well,
It seems like a pretty specific choice.
it was a symbol of American industrial might
Yeah.
at the time.
Right.
What's remarkable is how he was already demonstrating
Yeah.
his talent for economic forecasting back then.
Mm-hmm.
He actually predicted the 1958 recession
Wow.
based on his deep dive into the steel industry.
Really?
He noticed a decline in steel orders
Uh-huh.
and saw it as an early indicator of a broader economic downturn.
So he was already making a name for himself as someone who could see the signals that others missed.
Yeah.
How did he go from analyzing steel to advising presidents?
His expertise caught the attention of people in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
and he ended up working for Richard Nixon's presidential campaign in 1968.
Nixon. That's a name that evokes a lot of well-complicated feelings.
It was a tumultuous time
Yeah.
in American politics, but Greenspan's role in the campaign focused mainly on economic policy.
Right.
He developed policy proposals
Okay.
and even wrote speeches for Nixon.
Really?
There's even an anecdote about him advising Nixon
Uh-huh.
on a price control issue.
Okay.
A company wanted permission to raise prices, and Nixon, always sensitive to public perception,
Right.
was hesitant.
Price controls.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for trouble.
It can be, if not handled carefully.
Yeah.
Greenspan, however, argued that raising prices was actually the right move
Uh-huh.
to avoid potential shortages. He was already demonstrating his belief in market forces, even when dealing with political pressures.
So he was a voice of reason in the middle of political chaos.
Yeah, you could say that.
Did his work with Nixon lead to any other government roles?
It did.
Okay.
After Nixon's victory, Greenspan continued to serve in various advisory capacities.
Okay.
He was eventually appointed chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Gerald Ford.
Ford took over after Nixon resigned, right? What was the economic landscape like then?
It was a challenging time,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Right.
Watergate high oil prices and persistent inflation were plaguing the nation.
Yeah.
And then Greenspan had to face a deep recession on top of all that.
So how did he handle it?
Yeah.
Did he stick to the do-nothing approach
Right.
that many economists recommend for inventory recessions?
He didn't.
Okay.
He believed in a more measured approach and argued that targeted government action was sometimes necessary to stimulate the economy.
Interesting.
It's interesting to note that this contrasts with some of his later views,
Yeah.
where he became more skeptical of government intervention.
So his thinking evolved over time.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder how his philosophy shifted when he became chairman of the Fed.
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
His time at the Fed coincided with some of the most significant economic events
Yeah.
in recent history,
Right.
like the 1987 stock market crash, the savings and loan crisis,
Right.
and even the dot-com bubble.
Let's start with the 1987 crash.
Okay.
Black Monday, as it's called.
Yeah.
It was a pretty dramatic event, wasn't it?
It was.
I can only imagine the impact it had on global markets.
It was dramatic.
Yeah.
And the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged
Wow.
more than 22% in a single day.
Yeah.
The Fed, under Greenspan's leadership, had to act fast to prevent a complete financial meltdown.
So what did they do?
Well,
What's their strategy?
Greenspan acted decisively.
Okay.
He understood that maintaining confidence in the financial system was crucial.
Yeah.
So he injected liquidity into the banking system, reassuring investors that the Fed would be there to provide support.
Right.
The source material actually details his conversations with colleagues
Okay.
and the immense pressure of those crucial days.
That sounds like he was really in the hot seat.
Yeah,
Did he face any other major crises during his time at the Fed?
he did.
Okay.
Another big challenge was the savings and loan crisis.
Right.
Deregulation of the savings and loan industry in the 1980s had led to some risky lending practices
Yeah.
and widespread failures,
Right.
which ultimately cost taxpayers billions of dollars.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It seemed like a classic case of deregulation gone wrong.
It was a complex situation.
Yeah.
But Greenspan acknowledged that it showed the importance of strong regulatory oversight, even as he remained a proponent of free markets.
Right.
The lessons learned from the S&L crisis still shape financial regulation today.
It seems like he was always trying to find a balance between his belief in free markets and the need for intervention when things went off track.
Right.
It makes me curious about how he handled recessions as Fed chairman.
He had to deal with a few.
Yeah.
And the 1990-91 recession was a particularly tricky one.
Okay.
It was a credit crunch recession, which meant that banks were hesitant to lend money,
Right.
making it hard for businesses to invest and grow.
So what's so different about a credit crunch recession?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
It's not just a regular recession.
Yeah.
It's like the entire financial system is seizing up.
Right.
Imagine trying to get a loan to start a business in that environment.
Yeah.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
Greenspan's dilemma was how to encourage lending without fueling inflation.
Right.
He faced criticism for not acting more aggressively to lower interest rates.
Why didn't he just lower rates more quickly?
Well,
It seems like that would have helped.
he was concerned about reigniting inflation,
Okay.
which had been a major problem in the previous decade.
Right.
He was also dealing with political pressure
Yeah.
from the Bush administration, which wanted lower rates to boost the economy
Right.
before the 1992 election.
So he was walking a tightrope,
Yeah.
trying to balance economic stability with political realities.
Right.
What about the dot-com bubble?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was talking about the internet and getting rich quick back then.
Right.
I can't imagine he was immune to that kind of frenzy.
The dot-com bubble was definitely a period of rapid growth
Yeah.
for internet-related companies, fueled by speculation and investor enthusiasm.
Right.
Stock prices were soaring.
Yeah.
But many of these companies lacked solid business models.
Okay.
Greenspan even expressed concern about irrational exuberance in the stock market.
Irrational exuberance.
Yeah.
That sounds dramatic.
It was a... What did he mean by that?
Imagine a stock going up, not because the company is doing well.
But just because everyone believes it will keep going up,
Right.
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Until reality sets in.
But wouldn't doing something to address that, even if it wasn't perfect,
Right.
have been better than letting the bubble inflate to such dangerous levels?
He was hesitant to directly intervene to prick the bubble.
Okay.
He believed that trying to control asset prices was outside the Fed's mandate and could have unintended consequences.
Okay.
He also argued that the market would eventually correct itself,
Right.
although he underestimated the severity of the eventual downturn.
So he was right to be concerned, but maybe not forceful enough in his response?
Yeah, possibly.
That seems to be a recurring theme with Greenspan.
It does.
But before we move on to his role in globalization,
Okay.
can we touch on what he accomplished during his time with Ford?
Sure.
Did his approach to the recession work?
It's a mixed bag.
Okay.
The economy did eventually recover, but inflation remained a stubborn problem. Some people argue that his policies were too cautious,
Right.
while others believe he laid the groundwork for the economic expansion of the 1980s.
Right.
It's a debate that continues to this day.
No easy answers then. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about globalization.
Okay.
Greenspan traveled extensively
You did?
and witnessed firsthand the economic transformations happening around the world. His experiences in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union must have been particularly insightful.
They were.
Yeah.
He was struck by the contrast
Yeah.
between central planning and market economies.
Okay.
He even shared an anecdote about being surprised at being criticized for not sufficiently appreciating free markets
Wow.
while in Russia.
That's ironic considering his reputation as a champion of free markets.
Yeah.
What else stood out to him about the collapse of the Soviet Union?
He saw both the potential for growth and the difficulties of transitioning to a market-based system.
All right.
He believed that Russia, with its vast resources and talented people, had the potential to become a major economic force.
Right.
But that realizing that potential would require significant reform and a commitment to the rule of law.
It sounds like he had a more nuanced view of Russia's transition
He did.
than simply advocating for unbridled free markets.
Yeah, he recognized that there was no one-size-fits-all approach to economic development.
Right.
And that each country needed to find its own path.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
How about we pick things up in part 2 with the rise of China?
Sounds good to me.
It seems like that's a natural progression from the fall of the Soviet Union.
It is. The collapse of the Soviet economy, really highlighted those stark differences between central planning and market economies.
Right.
But it was also a fascinating counterpoint to the rapid rise of China, another country undergoing, a massive economic transformation.
It is incredible how much China's economy has grown. They've become a global powerhouse in such a short period.
Exactly. And Greenspan saw this coming.
Really?
He was fascinated about the challenges and opportunities China faced as they shifted from a centrally planned economy to a more market-oriented system.
Okay.
He recognized the sheer potential of China to become a major player on the world stage, but also saw the hurdles they had to overcome.
Like what kind of hurdles did he see?
He pointed to the need for a sound financial system, the importance of protecting intellectual property rights, and the complexities of dealing with environmental issues.
Right.
All crucial factors for a nation aiming for sustainable growth.
It sounds like he wasn't just impressed by their growth.
Right.
He had a much more balanced view.
He did.
Did he have any other noteworthy encounters on the world stage?
He did.
Okay.
He was involved in addressing the 1997 Asian financial crisis,
right,
which started in Thailand and spread rapidly to other countries in the region. The crisis really highlighted the interconnectedness of the global financial system.
It definitely had a ripple effect.
It did.
I remember how it impacted markets worldwide.
Yeah.
What role did Greenspan play in managing that crisis?
He worked with other policymakers to try and stabilize the situation.
Right.
He saw the crisis as a wake-up call, underscoring the need for greater cooperation and coordination among nations to prevent and manage such crises in the future.
So he was a pragmatist adapting to these new global challenges.
Yeah.
Earlier, we touched on his views on nuclear power as a potential solution to global warming. That's a pretty controversial topic.
It is.
Can you elaborate on his stance?
He was a strong advocate for increasing our reliance on nuclear power as a solution to reducing carbon emissions. He saw it as a safe and efficient way to generate electricity without contributing to greenhouse gases.
Right.
He argued that while there are risks associated with nuclear power, those risks are manageable with proper safety precautions.
I see.
Yeah.
So he was willing to take on these complex and often controversial issues.
He was.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about his broader reflections on economic growth and its challenges.
Sure.
I know he's a huge admirer of Adam Smith.
Oh, yeah.
The father of modern economics.
Oh, right.
How did Smith's ideas influence Greenspan's thinking?
Greenspan was a devoted student of Adam Smith.
Yeah.
He often cited Smith's insights into the power of free markets and the importance of limited government.
Okay.
He believed that Smith's ideas had gained more recognition in recent decades.
Right.
As countries around the world embraced market-oriented reforms.
Yeah.
But he also recognized that free markets aren't a perfect solution.
Right. There are always downsides.
There are.
What about issues like inequality and social dislocation?
Yeah.
Did he address those concerns?
He did.
Okay.
He talked about the inherent tension in capitalism, what he called the benefits of creative destruction.
Yeah.
Versus the social dislocation it can cause.
Creative destruction.
Yeah.
What did he mean by that?
He was referring to the idea that for economies to grow and evolve, sometimes old industries need to decline and be replaced by new ones.
Yeah.
This can be a painful process, leading to job losses and social upheaval.
So progress comes at a cost.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
He argued that this process is ultimately necessary for long-term growth.
Okay.
But he also emphasized the need for policies to help those who are negatively affected by economic change.
Yeah.
He believed we need to find ways to cushion the blow and provide opportunities for those who are left behind.
That sounds like a delicate balance.
It is.
He also talked about the modes of capitalism, right?
He did.
Can you explain what he meant by that?
Sure.
It sounds fascinating.
He identified different models of capitalism,
Okay.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
He noted that countries like Germany focus on social market economies with strong social safety nets and labor regulations.
Okay.
The U.S., on the other hand, leans more towards a laissez-faire approach with less government intervention.
Yeah.
He argued that each model has its own historical and cultural roots.
Right.
And that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that economic solutions need to be tailored to specific circumstances. It's not just about applying the same principles everywhere.
Exactly. Context matters.
Right.
Now, on a slightly different note,
Okay.
he also delved into the topic of happiness.
Okay.
His analysis of the problem of happiness is particularly intriguing.
The problem of happiness, what does that even mean? Happiness a problem?
He observed this disconnect between rising standards of living and actual happiness levels.
Okay.
While he acknowledged that meeting basic needs is essential for happiness,
Right.
he argued that beyond that, happiness is largely determined by our status relative to our peers.
So it's all relative.
It is.
That's kind of a bleak outlook, isn't it?
It can be.
Yeah.
But it's a reality that policymakers need to consider.
Right.
Greenspan suggested that policies focused only on boosting overall economic growth might not lead to greater happiness.
Okay.
If they don't address issues of relative status and inequality.
That's a thought-provoking perspective.
It is.
It seems like he was always looking beyond the traditional economic indicators to understand the deeper forces at play.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about the future.
Okay.
What were some of his biggest concerns about the long-term challenges facing the global economy?
Right.
I know energy was a major focus for him.
He was particularly worried about the growing global energy squeeze and our dependence on oil.
Right.
He was already warning about this decades ago.
And he was right.
He was.
Energy prices just keep going up.
They do.
What did he propose as a solution?
He was a vocal advocate for developing alternative energy sources and reducing our reliance on oil. He predicted that declining investment in expanding oil production capacity would inevitably lead to higher prices and heightened geopolitical tensions.
Yeah.
Something we are seeing play out today.
So he was ahead of the curve on that issue.
He was.
Did he have any specific insights into alternative energy sources beyond nuclear power?
He did. He was particularly interested in the natural gas industry.
Okay.
He saw huge potential for liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to become a major player in the global market.
LNG. Can you explain that a bit further for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. LNG is natural gas that's been cooled to a liquid state.
Okay.
Which makes it much easier to transport by ship.
Right.
Greenspan believed that LNG could play a crucial role in diversifying energy sources and reducing our reliance on oil.
Yeah.
Especially as global demand for natural gas continues to rise.
So he saw natural gas as a bridge fuel to a cleaner energy future.
Right.
What about technological innovation? Did he believe that technology could play a role in addressing these challenges?
He absolutely did.
Okay.
He emphasized the need for constant technological innovation to develop cleaner and more efficient energy sources.
Right.
He saw this as essential for achieving both economic growth and environmental sustainability.
So it's not just about finding new sources of energy.
Right.
It's about using technology to make those sources cleaner and more sustainable.
Exactly.
Did he see a role for government in driving this innovation?
He did.
Okay.
He believed that government could play an important role in providing incentives for research and development and implementing policies to reduce carbon emissions.
Okay.
He saw this as a partnership between the public and private sectors.
A collaborative approach, then.
Yep.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From Russia to China, from creative destruction to the problem of happiness.
Right.
But we still need to talk about his predictions for the future and his overall legacy. Ready to move on to the final part of our deep dive.
Ready when you are. Yeah, that Delphic future, it's a really evocative phrase.
It is.
And I think it speaks to this idea that, we can never really know for sure what's going to happen.
Right.
But we could use, our knowledge and experience to make educated guesses about the possibilities.
He spent so much of his career fighting inflation.
Right.
It makes sense that, he'd be concerned about it rearing its head again.
Yeah.
What did he see as the biggest risk factors for a resurgence of inflation?
I think he believed that as global demand for resources continues to grow, especially with the rise of these massive economies like China and India, that it would put upward pressure on prices.
Right. Supply and demand.
Exactly.
And once that inflationary psychology takes hold, it can be very difficult to control.
Absolutely.
Did he have any predictions about interest rates?
He believed that long-term interest rates were likely to rise.
Okay.
He pointed to declining global savings rates and increasing demand for capital, which would push borrowing costs higher.
Yeah, that affects everybody.
It does.
From homeowners with mortgages to, governments financing their debt.
It has ripple effects throughout the entire system.
Higher interest rates mean higher borrowing costs.
Right.
Which could put a damper on economic growth.
Exactly. It's kind of a
vicious cycle.
It is. And Greenspan recognized that, this would be a major challenge for policymakers. Who would need to find ways to balance the need for economic growth with the need to keep inflation in check.
Another tightrope walk.
Always a tightrope walk.
We've talked a lot about China.
We have.
Greenspan seemed convinced that they would continue to be a major force in the global economy.
Right.
But did he view them as a threat to the U.S.?
I think he saw them as both a competitor and a potential partner.
Okay.
He believed that China's economic growth would inevitably lead to increased competition with the U.S.
Right.
But he also saw opportunities for cooperation. In areas like trade and investment.
So a complex relationship.
It is.
Just like most things in the global economy.
Exactly.
It seems like his perspective on China is reflective of his overall approach to economics. Nuanced, pragmatic, and always searching for the bigger picture.
Absolutely. He wasn't tied to any rigid ideology.
Right.
He was a pragmatist who was willing to adjust his views based on the evidence and, the changing circumstances.
Thinking back on his long career, how should we remember Alan Greenspan?
Well, I think he was a towering figure in economic policy. Someone who played a key role in shaping the global economy for decades. I mean, he's a brilliant analyst, a gifted communicator, and a master of navigating that complex world of finance and politics.
He wasn't without his critics, though, right?
Right, he wasn't.
Some people blame him for the 2008 financial crisis.
There are definitely those who argue that, he kept interest rates too low for too long in the early 2000s, which they believe contributed to the housing bubble and the eventual crisis. Others criticize his faith in the self-regulating power of markets. Saying it blinded him to the risks building up in the financial system.
So a mixed legacy, a brilliant mind who also made his share of mistakes.
I think that's a fair assessment.
But there's no denying his profound impact on economic policy.
Absolutely not.
I mean, he guided the U.S. economy through some really turbulent times.
He did.
And his insights, I think, are still relevant today.
They are.
As we face new challenges like climate change and the rise of new global powers.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
In this deep dive into Alan Greenspan's Age of Turbulence.
What stands out to me is the sheer scope of his experience. and how he connected those firsthand accounts to broader economic theories.
Right.
It's like getting, a behind-the-scenes look at how the levers of global finance really work.
I think what I find so fascinating is how he balanced his belief in free markets.
Yeah.
With a pragmatic understanding of their limitations.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to acknowledge the need for regulation and government intervention when necessary.
Yeah.
That kind of nuanced perspective is often missing from today's economic debates.
Yeah.
Which tend to be much more polarized.
And for you, listener, I think the key takeaway here is to think critically about the forces shaping our world.
Absolutely.
Greenspan offers, I think, a really valuable framework.
He does.
But the challenge is to apply it to the choices we face as individuals, as businesses, as a society. What kind of future do we want to create?
That's the question.
The age of turbulence may be Greenspan's story.
Yeah.
But it's far from over.
Did you get any of that?